Good day. My name is Chilozona Eze. I am the president of Igbo Studies Association. I'm happy to welcome you to our inaugural intellectual conversation that we have called the Dialogue. Its goal, as the name implies, is to engage in friendly and insightful sharing of ideas for the good of our world. I'm happy to introduce the two writers and scholars to lead today's conversation. Ukamaka Olisakwe grew up in Kano, Nigeria, and now lives in Vermilion, South Dakota. In 2014, she was named one of Africa's most promising writers under the age of 40 by the UNESCO World Book Capital for the Africa 39 project. In 2016, she was awarded an honorary fellowship in writing from International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. In 2018, she won the Vermont College of Fine Arts Emerging Writer Scholarship for the MFA in Writing and Publishing program. Ukamaka, a finalist for the Miles Moreland Writing Scholarship, has had her works appear in the New York Times, Granta, Long Reads, The Rumpus, Catapult, Rattle, Waxwing, Jalada, Brittle Paper, Hunger Mountain, Samsonia Way, and more. Her books include Eyes of a Goddess in 2012 and Ogadimma in 2020. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of Isele magazine. Uchechukwu Peter Umezurike holds a PhD in English from the University of Alberta, Canada. An alumnus of the International Writing Program, Umezurike is a co-editor of Writs for Wayfarers, an anthology of poems, and author of Wishmaker, Masube Books in 2021, and Double Wahala, Double Trouble, Griot's Lounge in 2021. He is the winner of the 2021 Nigeria Prize for Literary Criticism. So please help me to welcome our scholars and writers.
So, thank you, Dr. Chiloeze. It's my honor and my pleasure to be in this gathering of kindred spirits. And I'm also delighted to be sharing this space with Ukamaka Olisakwe, whom I've known for, I think, more than a decade. And I also want to use this opportunity to thank everyone who made our time to be here with us to share in this fellowship of intellectual and creative undertakings. So I'll also invite Ukamaka to just share a few words before we go into the event proper.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chilozona, for inviting me and hosting this, for even creating this opportunity. Here in Vermilion, I've been here, I've not spoken Igbo to anyone in a very long time. So you don't have an idea how joyful it is for me to be able to speak Igbo never in this forum. Thank you so much for sir, for this opportunity, and my brother Uche Peter Umez, who I met in 2011. So it's been a very long year. It's his family, and when he informed me about this, I'm like, of course, I'm going there. I feel safe. I feel safe. Whenever I talk to my family, my husband knows him. I'll tell my husband, oh, Uche is like, oh, Uche can't come there. Like his family, and it's such an honor to be here with him. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, thank you to the Igbo Studies Association for making this possible. So the format of this dialogue is going to be, so Ukamaka, I'll invite her to read for 7 minutes, and I'll ask her a couple of questions, and we'll open the space for the audience to also ask questions directed to her and to me, but it's going to be more or less conversational. So you can put your questions or your comments in the chat box, but you can also voice them. So we look forward to a productive and convivial conversation this morning here in space. So without wasting much of our time, I would like to invite Ukamaka Olisakwe to read a short excerpt from a wonderful book. If you don't have a copy, please try and get a copy of this. And I enjoyed reading it, and I also had the opportunity to interview her on this. So please, Ukamaka, can you gift us with the power of your creativity?
Thank you so much. I must say that every time I read from this book, I always go to the safe place from chapter 1, which is easier for me to ease into. The atmosphere is sort of like a smooth ride. But Uche asks for a very specific part, and a little because I get very nervous when I read something that has to do with intimacy. I start sort of stuttering, so I don't know. So yeah, I'll start reading from page 244. Briefly, the book is about this young woman who, due to unfortunate circumstance, her dreams of going to a university was thwarted, and she got married to this man who looked nice initially, but then it became quite a very toxic union, and she had to walk away from it. The book is it's sort of a love letter and a tribute to my mother's generation. We married very, very early. I know very early. My mom married when she was like 16. I married when I was 19. My aunts, all of them, that generation sort of trickled down to my own generation. So writing this is a tribute to them, sort of like documenting their story for the future. It's a very difficult book, maybe the most difficult thing I've ever written. And I won't write a book like this ever again because I was traumatized even writing it, but I had to be true to reality as much as possible while writing this book. So I'll read from page 244, when she had found her voice and when she had learned to be selfish a bit, to put her first self before anything else. May I sit with you? He pointed to the empty chair before her. She began to say no, but her old manners, which constantly crept into her daily relations with people, begged her to be nice. She waved him over and he sat, settling right in front of her. The table was short and square, and there wasn't enough space, meaning that their hands would touch once they began to eat. And that was the least unsettling part. He would be looking directly into her eyes, watching her every move, from the lift of her fork to how she chewed her food, even how she drank her water. The unexpected intimacy made her self-conscious. She, who had only that morning sworn to be a strong, unbending woman. And so she stared at her moi-moi, watching it turn cold. I am Ogadimma, she offered. My name is Karim, he said. He didn't extend his hand, and she blushed with relief. She was not ready for the touch of skin. Her mind was running in circles as her gaze hovered over him. He carried himself well without effort. He started to talk, and she watched his lips move. It had been a while since she observed a man like this, since her head got filled with silly thoughts, and this amused and irritated her. Karim talked on, and she listened. He could not read her mind anyway, and this made her discomforted her. Then he said he visited the eatery often and had never seen her before. He would have noticed her because she could never hide in a crowd. He grinned as he said this, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He was flirting, but he was careful not to appear too forward. This is my first time here, she said. It appears you watch every woman, or should I say every woman who comes in here? And he was taken aback by this, only for an instant. Then he smiled, his two dimples sinking deep in his cheeks. and Ogadimma would later remember it as the moment they bonded. She liked his smile, the flash of his coconut white teeth, as he said, no, I run a business next door. How is it even possible to watch women who come here? Come on, I noticed you because of the little drama, he said with pious emphasis. He dug into his jollof rice and then glanced at her plate, which still sat untouched, his eyes asking if she didn't want to eat her moi moi anymore. She wiped her fork with a napkin and began to eat. So what do you do next door? She asked, picking through her food, forking tiny pieces so she could chew without opening her mouth too wide. I run an art studio. I am a visual artist and a photographer, he said. Nice, he shrugged. I could never draw a straight line, she added, and immediately felt she sounded stupid, uninteresting. I am a makeup artist, she added quickly. He lifted a brow. Awesome. Do you have a studio yet? Not yet. I still work under my boss. You could be my next client, Seth. I don't wear makeup, he laughed. But you have a girlfriend or a wife? She glanced at his ring finger. He was not wearing any, and she was surprisingly filled with relief. I don't have a girlfriend or a wife, he said. They watched each other, and she contemplated his declaration, which sunk heavily between them. He had put the first foot forward, and his eyes urged her to declare her status too. I am divorced and I have a son, but he lives with his father. Then she held his eyes, examined his face to see how he took her declaration. Her brother Nnanna had informed her the week before. Her cousin Nnanna had informed her the week before that her father had finally returned the bride price to be paid, nullifying their marriage. The news had brought her relief. She was no longer tethered to Tobe. But now, as she watched Karim lean back in his seat, his face seemingly folding in, she remembered her father's long talk about second-hand women and how men want nothing to do with them. Do you have a problem with divorced women? She asked Karim. No, not at all, I don't. He had finished eating his rice. He had finished eating his rice and had begun to gather his things. And for a moment, she was worried that he was in a haste to leave, that she had scared him with her truth. Something heavy sank in her stomach. She bent over to finish the last of her moi moi. Would you like to share a drink with me? He added. I know a bar nearby. She looked up. Blood was starting in her ears. I wouldn't want to be a bother. Please. She considered this. There was an earnestness in his voice that tugged at her, that warmed her heart. So she gathered her back and followed him. The bar was right across the road and was crowded with people, even though it was only 7 in the evening. Perhaps it was so because it was a weekend and workers, many of them dressed in business suits, most probably bankers, finally found the time to mingle. Karim led them to a table at the far end of the bar, a booth which opened directly into a large space filled with disco lights and occupied by couples who wanted to stay away from the glare of the roving eyes. This doubles as a nightclub, she said, after she sat. Yes, he raised his voice because the music and the chattering from the other booths were too loud, so that people huddled close, faces almost meeting in the middle of the tables in order for them to hear each other. Do you club? He asked. No, never. When I was a small girl, we were told that only bad girls go to clubs. I feel like a bad girl now. I like this feeling. She leaned close. She could smell his cologne. Her heart was racing with something new, a feeling that was so fresh, so strange. She wanted to kiss him. It felt like a reckless but the right thing to do. She thought back to 2 years ago when she had sat demurely in a bar with Tobe and his friends, how she had listened to them talk politics about their childhood, how she had blended with the background rather than shone. Now she didn't need to look in the shadows or seek anyone's permission before she spoke. Now she could dictate the tone and flow of a conversation with a man. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Thank you all so much for listening to the reading.
Thank you very much, Ukamaka, for that compelling reading. I really, like I said, I really enjoyed the book, Ogadima, and there's so much to unpack in terms of gender violence, domestic abuse, male hegemony, patriarchy, even intimacy, as you just read. In this excerpt. And one of badness, strong, independent, self-assertive women with badness in quotes. And to be a strong woman, to be independent is seen to be like, oh, well, she's radical, and so she's bad. And I really appreciate how you unpacked this complexity in that, and thinking about silence and violence, and silence and voice, and all these issues that are really central to your artistic vision. So I was wondering, you mentioned that Ogadima, and I know you've mentioned it elsewhere, that Ogadima is a love letter to your community, that's Abagana. Can you speak a little bit more about this?
Okay, yeah, so we are very conservative in my community. We have this idea of what a woman should be, how a woman should carry herself, what even defines a woman. For example, why any problem with is struggling, like, oh, that one is not a woman, such notions of what womanhood constitutes. So for Ogadima, the women in Ogadima is actually a composite of all these women, who were, had to walk the line that society had marked for them, who could not step away from that line, who want to be virtuous, who want to be good wife to raise their children with their husband. So my community, the idea was that when you don't have a man come to knock on your father's door to ask for your hand, your name has spoiled. Even for me, for example, even at the age of 15, I already had suitors. At the age of 16, they were already taking photographs of me to send to people. Parents would come to send to people in Texas, where HA is, to send people in America, so that they will come and marry this guy, before I was spoiled in my father's house, because that was something, was a cycle, that kept on. For some of the marriages, they were very successful. My parents' marriage is very successful, but then for others, they weren't successful, so it's a letter to them. So for Ogadima, what she did, for those that stayed, that endured a lot of violence, she sort of portrayed their lives and sort of lived their reality in this book. And those that walked away, which she then did at the end of the book, sort of like merging those two categories of women in my community. Those that stayed, those that were happy at the beginning, you see her being happy in that marriage, and those that endured violence, see her also living that reality, and those that walked away, sort of like merging those different narratives of the women in my community, in my immediate community. I always like to emphasize on that, not even just Abagana, in Abagana, own clan, somebody else's reality, somebody from a different village, or for example, will not have this experience, So I like to emphasize that it's very particular to my immediate community. So it's sort of like a communal archive. What I did here, like documenting for history, and then now the current work I am doing, it sort of goes all the way back. Like now I want to see, okay, even before all this, how did they live? What was agency like? And that sort of sent me to this deep research thing. I realized, oh my God, a lot of wild things were happening back those days. So it's sort of that has become my life, or sort of like feeling that communal archive. I want people to be able to Google Abagana, to look up stories about Abagana beyond the political history, like Biafra War, when they temporarily defeated the Nigerian soldiers at Abagana. I want stories about Abagana, just like Chimamanda is doing with Abba, like I want Abagana to feature mostly in my narrative, to feel that community the communal archive to document for history. Yeah, that's what Ogadima essentially is doing.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting, like all the projects you're hoping to undertake. I really like that phrase, communal archive, and how you are going about bringing up narrative of agency, particularly female agency. And one thing I also found very useful to think about is how you complicate this concept of virtue, and then why women, or how dominant narrative consigns women to always be virtue or associate femininity with virtue. And one of the things we did in Ogadima was to bring some complexity into this idea that virtue is almost a fantasy. It's almost an ideal, which of course, like every ideal, it's impossible to attain. And so, and I also like the fact that one of the sentences that jumped at me was where you described Ogadima as used to lurking in the shadows. And in the end, we see how she fights so much to break through the veils of shadows to assert her voice, assert her agency. And interestingly enough, your novel, Ogadima, speaks to the topic for today, which is impediments, hopes, and joys of the modern African woman or modern African women. And I think I'm just wondering, what are your challenges for thinking about the future of African women? What are your fears? And do you see, with all that is happening, particularly back home and then globally, what do you think is the future of narratives, and how these narratives, they can drive social change that work to benefit women in general, not only those within the middle class or those within the lower class, but women across various social categories and various social divides.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for that question, Uche. Something that I started with Ogadima, and I'm going to continue as I develop, sort of spread my tentacles around all my project, is to write from this class of people we consider the lower class, because we often have stories about the middle class, the rich folks. My idea is, or my dream, because I come from a low income earning family, and I know how different our reality is when compared to people from middle class family. We didn't share the same reality, the same privileges. For example, which is very common in my area, a girl would get pregnant back then. And what I mean back then, in fact, I see it happen to my cousin in 2010. As early as 2010 happened to my cousin, 2011 actually. So where a girl gets pregnant, for example, this idea of virtue, so the girl should not get pregnant, out of wedlock. She gets pregnant, what my community did, and I hope that they've stopped doing that. What they were doing was they would marry her off to a widow, an old widower, like so old that at least 40 years older than that, a sort of punishment, and using her as a yardstick to, set an example, in the community, to warn other girls from being, wayward, from being corrupt. So they had an idea. So that was the metric they were using, to set for virtue. This is what happens to you if you don't conform. This is what happens to you if you dare get pregnant. If this is what happens to you if you are not a virgin at marriage. If this is what happens to you if you are caught playing with boys. There are a lot of punishments for girls. And for Ogadima, you see her towing that line. And then when she's strayed, she knows the punishment, because we have the aunt who got pregnant, and what happened to the aunt? she was married off to an old widower. And then she, knowing that this will be the consequence, for strain for the communal idea of virtue, what she then did was to go get an abortion. That almost cost her life, but then she was grateful that she did, because her reality would have been like an Auntie Angoleka who got pregnant. So it's such a very personal thing for me to do, this idea of, and also to push back against, for having to make sure that my characters no longer lurk in the shadow. The current project that I'm working on, the character, like, it's so brazen and so selfish and so narcissist. And it's not just me imagining or sort of creating this wild person. It actually came from history, from researching, from listening to stories, for even asking questions. Joa Jojo spoke with my parents. So tell me about this person, like listening, so that I'll be able to have a kind of an image of that person in my head before I then bring them on the page. And what I am constantly doing with my current project is to make sure that I am pushing back against those ideas, because those things are, they hold people back. They are even very risky when you such stern and such rigid, markers for women on how to be. They make mistakes. It's like when you lock a door and tell a child not to go there. That's when they will go there. You've drawn an attention there, but when you are more understanding, when we can even honestly have conversation about sex. We can't even have conversation about sex when we can honestly have conversation about sex, and the consequence, and do that, which is what I constantly do with my own children. I mean, they're old. My first child is 19. The second one is about to be 18. So so they when you constantly have such conversation with them, you don't have to have rigid rules for them. You don't have to warn them, I will punish you and this will happen, because they now understand. So that's what Ogadema is pushing for a conversation, not conversation between women, conversation even with men in our communities, conversation about these things that we do wrong or we did wrong, so that we'll find a way to correct them. Because if we don't talk about them, how then do we forge ahead? How then do we correct the mistakes of the past?
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful response. And I think it's really important to have conversation, because one thing narrative does is to bring those marginal lives, those silenced issues to the foreground. And novels help us to, or they stimulate us to have that kind of conversation, and which you've been doing in all your literary undertakings. And I remembered reading your heartbreaking essay on postpartum depression, and I said, wow, you just put everything out there. And I think it's the same thing you did with your novel. And I remember feeling that, oh, wow, Ukamaka wrote from a place of vulnerability, but she also wrote from a place of anger at what Chielo Eze in his book on ethics and human rights called interlocking forms of oppression. And I think you, in a way, the book was an outrage at this systemic and traditional practices that keep women in the shadows, that constrain them from speaking up, from asserting their personhood, for even narrating their experiences, and which is what you've done for Igbo culture, for Nigerian culture, and then for global culture. And I really commend you for that. And for me, it was no surprise that you just won the Spring Authors Prize. Yeah, that was yesterday, right?
Yeah, that was actually this morning. Thank you so much.
Oh, this morning. Oh, wow. Yeah, because I woke up and then saw it. I said, oh, yeah, this is good. This book deserves every form of attention. Because it's not only provocative in the issues it talked about, particularly domestic violence and male violence, men being at the center of this kind of practice. But I also like the way you brought complexity to a gender relation in such a way that it's not only men generally who are complicit in subjugating women, but also women in their own ways also partake in furthering the subjugation of women. And I remember two characters, Auntie Ngozi and Mama Yabo, and how how steep they were in patriarchal ideology. But it's also heartening that you have a character such as Ejiro, who believes in female solidarity, who believes in supporting women to fight against these interlocking forms of oppression. And so congratulations on winning the 2021 Spring Women Authors Prize. And how are you feeling right now about that?
I woke up around 4 o'clock. So the prize ceremony was at 5 o'clock Nigeria, West Africa time. So I woke up 4 a.m. Just read a bit from my texts that a project I'm working on, just to keep myself active and sort of keep my eyes open, because when I wake up immediately from sleep, my face is swollen. So then it happened, and I'm grateful for that. I liked what you said about being vulnerable. For me, like what I do constantly with my essays, it makes some people uncomfortable, being that vulnerable, because there's this idea that there's this notion we have of what literature should do. Literature, like it should be looking more on the outside, like documenting society, the community, the global narrative, national narrative on the outside. Even if when we have the person, you look a bit inward and then you look outward, because you're doing something, not just about, you're not being self-absorbed. But I don't agree with that. No, sometimes it's good to be self-absorbed because we don't encourage people to look into the self. So that's why we don't even ask the questions that we should do. For example, like you have the character Auntie Ngozi in the text, the trait in the patriarchy in the text. And for her, she's not, that's not what she's doing. That's the only truth she knows. That was the only thing she knew how to do. This was what society raised her. This is how to be a woman. And she had to continue it. So if we don't have conversation about that, because some people that even sometimes when we call people the princesses of patriarchy, like on Twitter, I'm like, do you know the person's history? This is the only, so I welcome conversation. I would rather have conversation with that person. So we'll continue to talk about that. Like in my postpartum essay that I wrote for Long Reads that you mentioned, when I gave birth to my first child, it was a very difficult labor, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit personal here. It was a very difficult labor, and they had to use, like a device to help pull my baby out. And so my baby ended up having a bump at the back of her head. What then happened was my aunt told me to hide it, because when people see it, my aunt-in-law, when people see it, they call me weak. They will say I was not strong enough to bring my baby out. So they already have notions of what that, and that has to do with Christianity. We often have this recitation from the Bible, give birth like the women of Hebrew. So if you have the CS, you are not the women of Hebrew. This new culture we've merged with our own traditional culture. If you needed help, like epidurals or whatever, you're not really but a strong woman should push the baby. Have these notions, not thinking of even the disfiguration that comes after childbirth. So for my aunt, what she did was to tell me to hide it, and that filled me with so much shame and sort of led to a lot of chain reaction of really horrible things that happened. To her, she was protecting me from the society. But from the outside, when you look at it, you would think that she's enabling the patriarchy. But to her, she's protecting me from the patriarchy. So it's so complicated, all these threads, and we don't understand how complicated they are until we talk about them, which is what I do constantly with my project, to also show that these women, this is the only truth they know. Yeah. They don't have the privilege of being in a PhD program like me to read, have conversation. They live in their little communities, and this is the only thing they know how to be. So when you don't open such channels, when you don't include them in the discourse, when you leave them on the marginal, you continue to sort of categorize them as the princesses of patriarchy without understanding that there was a social conditioning that went into forming or beating them into the shape that they are today. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that amazing response. And it got me thinking about how cultural scripts and then cultural ideology, or even how culture socializes male and female individuals into subscribing to particular notions of what it means to be a female or to be a male. And one of the last classes I taught was about images of masculinities in literary and cultural text, and it's important to really understand that we in a way we are working within a script, or we've been encoded with cultural scripts that define and organize and even compel us to perform gendered ideas or gendered identities in particular ways that do not call attention to the kind of violence inherent in culture. And I thank you for bringing this up, and how these traumatic conversations can be had and heard, and why it's important for people to not only wholly believe everything that culture says, because culture is just it's just a kind of analog algorithm, and we have to question it, we have to probe it, we have to even hold ourselves accountable for certain actions we do. And I think it's important to really think about what it means to be a gendered being in this time and place, and existing within particular cultures that tell us how to relate to each other, or how to even define who is a virtuous woman, who is a strong woman, who is a real man, who is a normal man, and all these labels that attach themselves to gendered identities. So what I want us to do right now is to open the space for audience to ask us questions, and then we can respond to those questions. I hope you're okay with that, Okamaka?
Yes, I'm 100%. And I have a first question for you. You know,
okay. Maybe we'll keep that. We'll save it for last. And okay. Yeah, I'm excited to respond to your questions. So, please, we invite you to ask either Okamaka or me questions. You can ask any questions relating to writing, art, or even generally about the politics of writing, or even the politics of narratives. So the floor or the space is open, and we are looking forward to having conversation with the audience as well.
I think Professor Eze has his hands up.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Wow, Professor Eze. Wow. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I have a question. As you were speaking, I just wanted to ask the question. It's not about writing though. So it's about this gender thing and society and women. Because I personally believe that to be happy in our society, especially African society, you have, as a woman, you have to be rebellious. You can't be a normal woman the way the way society wants you to be. I don't believe you can be happy. You may not know that you're not happy. I don't even know how to explain it, but I just believe that you have to be rebellious to be fulfilled, to have a satisfying life. And you mentioned patriarchy queens, people who are called patriarchy queens on Twitter and Facebook. And I use Facebook a lot, and sometimes I get into arguments with it, and it's very frustrating. And I understand that I am in a PhD program, and I definitely understand some things better now than I understood in the past, and better than some people who have not even had been in a master's program at least, or people who have not even had their undergraduate program. But I also see people graduate, they've gone through I just feel like people who have gone to school at least, or people who have, I don't know, my thoughts are just scattered, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that when I was a child, I know that going to university helped me open my eyes to a lot of things. I began to see a lot of things differently. But when I was a child, I think I was about 8 or 9, I used to notice some things. For instance, there was this family, they had 2 girls and 3 boys. So the last child was Ikenna, a boy, and then his older sister, Onyebuchi. I used to notice that she used to, because it was a public yard and you see when people are going to have their bath. So she'll put bath water for Ikenna in the bucket and take it to him in the bathroom all the time. And Ikenna was not sick or anything. And Ikenna was not doing that for Onyebuchi. Even as a 9-year-old or 8-year, I noticed that something was off about that. So, and again, when I was 14 or thereabouts, a neighbor jokingly asked me to iron his trousers. And I told him that I didn't know how to iron trousers because I wasn't wearing trousers at the time. And I didn't even know how to iron clothes generally very well. And he said, what? So how are you going to get married if you don't know how to iron trousers? It didn't even make sense to me. And then I was in secondary school. So what I'm trying to say is that, do you really have to go to school to an advanced level before you begin to notice some things? And what do we do with women who, okay, maybe they don't understand, but they not just that they stay in their ignorance, they go out of their way to fight women who are trying to live differently. So it doesn't help me. I'm trying to be patient with them, but then they are fighting me. So how do I navigate my relationship with them?
Thank you so much, Hope, for that. That's brilliant question. I do also want to also add that I like it that we have complicated people. We have textured people. We don't have everyone who agree with one way of being. You know, everyone, like you come in a community, everyone agrees with one thing. That was what we had with the version of Christianity we had in my part of Kano State. You know, our church split into 2 because we had the staunch evangelical Anglicans, you know, that we spoke in tongues, we do all that. And then we split from those who we felt were not as Christian or Christ-like as we want them to be. So we have to have sort of like that insularity. You have one people who believe in this ideology, everyone follows that terrain. We have people who believe in that everyone they go this way. And that clash often happened until we came back and united. I think the point I'm just trying to say is that it's impossible, it would be difficult to come into a community or anywhere, be it online, virtual, within our immediate community, to find people who agree with everything we think. Even notions of womanhood, ideas of family, even Christianity, religion, for example, even the idea of education. My late grandmother would ask you, yeah, education, even business education, apprenticeship in Nigeria is still education, you know, like education varies. But Ogadima in my book, she wanted to go to university, but she couldn't. She ended up getting a different kind of education that helped her financially, you know. So it's also kind of education goal. But I think for your frustration with those women, I think it takes a lot of patience and it will take a lot of constant conversation. The only thing I did, the most important thing I did enjoy and I did gain from all my education is asking questions. Sometimes you're not encouraged to ask questions, you know. So for me, the huge plus from all my university education is asking questions, challenging the norm. So knowing that it's okay to ask questions, to challenge people and to not be victimized, and also to be more accepting of people who are very conservative in their beliefs, you know. Recently, or not even recently, last fall, I had a student who wrote a paper on immigration and was like, immigrants who come to this country are criminals, aliens, like people. I mean, your teacher, look at the teachers in Nigeria, you know, talking about people coming here, they're taking our jobs, they are all of that. So what I learned to do, like that interaction with that student taught me so much about myself. So I learned to put my biases on the side and then to engage that student, you know, like in terms of text and also support your claims, you know, with this so that we'll have a very, respectful and polite conversation, and despite our different notions of the ways of being, our different biases. So bias, will they always be there? They will always be there, but it's this idea of dialoguing with people that helps me in wading through all that frustration.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, thank you for those brilliant exchanges between you and Hope Eze. So we have 3 questions, one from Dr. Ejike Eze, the other one from Chike Woke, and the third question from ISA. So please, to really maximize our time, if we can keep our questions short, that would be much appreciated. So Dr. Ejike Eze, could you go on with your question, and then after you, Chike would ask his. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Chair. And Ukamaka, very good to see you. First of all, congratulations to both of you on your both recent awards. I read this morning on your award, Ukamaka and Uche, yours a couple of weeks ago, so congratulations. I read Ogadimma and I thoroughly enjoyed it. You still owe me an interview, by the way, Ukamaka, I think you remember. But I love that book. I've given it out as gifts to a couple of people already, and I will continue to do that. I loved the complexity of the characters, especially the character of Ogadimma. The question I have is, I run a book club for teens as a way of encouraging them to read more. And in that book club, we have people ranging in age from 11 to 22. So it's not just teens, got a couple of college kids. And so I had been thinking about whether it was appropriate to read Ogadimma with that group and look at the heavy subject that's discussed, and it's been weighing on me on whether this was really an appropriate book for teenagers to be reading. What Ogadimma went through was traumatic and all of that. And then I hear you talk today about the need for openness, talk about, you know, some of these these heavy items, especially sex, with young people. And so I want to put that question to you. Would you recommend that book for kids that young to go through in a book club? What would you suggest for us?
I wouldn't recommend it for people as young as 11. Maybe people from the age of 18, they'll be able to 17, 18. I don't know, 17. That range could stomach the really dark and really strong themes. I mean, young adults do read a lot of fantasies, like YA fantasies can be really dark. You know, it was really one of them, like, whoa, you know. But I think from the age of 17, they should be able to read Ogadimma, because Ogadimma herself, she's 17 years old in the book.
Right.
From the age of 17, they can be able to read. But anything younger than that, what I've been toying with the idea of even having a children's, you know, sort of a younger version, you know, children's version of Ogadimma, sort of like even a coloring, not even color, like with illustrations, the watered down version of this, so that you can be able to sort of digested version of what Ogadimma is essentially talking about. So they'll be able to read it, and also to be able to get the message that the adulthood or the young adults would get from that book. And on this side, I'm also, I think I must, I've been toying with that idea for a very long time, but then I saw my brother Uche publish a children's book. I'm like, I'm going to do that too. So I'm thinking of these ideas much for that audience, targeting a book for that audience. I would still carry the same weight of the message. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it.
And I owe you an interview. I promise.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick one. For those who don't know, Dr. Ejike Eze is one of the editorial board directors of Nigerian Parenting magazine. They are based in the US, and then they do a lot of advocacy on Nigerian narratives and stories about Nigerians in diaspora. So just in case you have an idea or a story or an opinion to pitch, you can always reach out to Dr. Eze, and then he will create a column or a platform for you to have those stories shared. So we have 3 more questions, one from Chike Woke, and after that, ISA, and then Ugochukwu.
Hi, everyone.
Chike, go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for organizing this wonderful session. So my question is still related to gender and patriarchy, and it connects to the Igbo culture. So I follow Twitter trends a lot, or social media trends in general. And I don't know if you guys have seen this trend about the average Igbo man. You know, the average Igbo man being an epitome of patriarchy, so to say. And the average Igbo man perhaps being like, you know, the cliche or nature market man who wants his wife to stay at home and then he wants to do the business and be the big man, sort of. And on the other hand, when you read Igbo history, for instance, the works of Wanda Achebe and also the works of Oloda Ekwano, you'll see that Igbo women had agency, or Igbo women in that society had some power. So in writing, and this question goes to Ukamaka, in writing, how do you balance these extremes? And do you feel a sort of cultural responsibility to portray the Igbo not as Igbo man or the Igbo culture, not as perhaps patriarchal, or do you feel this responsibility to also portray a sense of cultural power or cultural identity in that sense? I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, Chike. Something I always push back against is generalization. You know, when you have a single story of an entire people, oh, the Igbo men are this, or the Igbo women are this. The Igbo people love money. The Hausa people are all bad, or Yoruba people, everybody. I don't like. Let me not use that word like. I push back. I am very resistant to single stories about the people. I believe in complexity. Do we have people who champion the patriarchy with all their chests, you know? In my community, yes, we do. But do we have people who also push back against that? You know, yes, we do. Do we have people who have grown from being the champions of that culture, that idea that the man dominates, the man tells the woman to sit there, she sits there, she doesn't move? Do we have people who have grown from that and that they have changed within even my immediate family? Yes, we do. You know, what I do constantly in my book is in sort of response to such conversation. I haven't seen that Twitter conversation, thankfully. But what I always do in my stories, in my essays, is to show how complex we are as a people, how complex, even in Ogadema, for example, you would see the father who absolutely loves, I think the character in the book that I absolutely love, it's not even Ogadema, it's Ogadema's father that I love. You know, this man is so complex, he loves his daughter so much, cooks for the daughter, cleans for the daughter, does everything for this child, loves this child. I mean, but then she strayed away from his idea of femininity, you know, and he had to punish her. You know, so you get to see that, you see where he had to fall back to that idea of this is what a woman should be. But then the idea of what a man should be, a man in our community, a man doesn't have a kitchen. That idea that I grew up, and that was the thing I knew. But my dad cooked for us, you know, so it's so different. So what I always do in my text, like my dad is my best friend. I mean, if I kill someone today, my dad is going to claim he's the one that did it. He would do anything for me, you know, so we have that kind of relationship. And what I do all the time is to show that complexity in my text. You would have people who are really so kind, just like the uncle also in the book, really so kind, but sometimes they falter, they make mistakes. You also have the aunt Ngozi, who loves Ogadema, cares for Ogadema, but still sort of falters. We also have strong people like Ifoma, for example, who started out looking like a very strong feminist, you know, but then she ended up, you know, faltering. So what I do is to sort of have that shifting tones in the book to show that people can be complex, people will make mistakes, people will stand up, and you can't have a single story of an entire community, because when you walk into that book and you say, oh, she wrote about Igbo men are bad, no, but you also have Nana in the book, you know, who has an entirely different idea of what masculinity should be. So that's what I do constantly in my as a cultural response, and also a cultural response, a response to that, and also a cultural responsibility for me is to show that complexity in all of my texts. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Chielo Eze, do you still have a question?
Mine is not much of a question as just a general comment and to express my gratitude for the works you guys are doing. And I start with Ogadimma. I think Ogadimma is such a wonderful and profound narrative that reminded me of Zora Neale Hurston's The Eyes We Are Watching God. And what I love about Jenny, the protagonist of The Eyes We Are Watching God, is that, you know, by the way, for me, she remains the model of Black feminism, you know. And she was not against men, right? So she was just for herself. She wanted to draw attention to her right to desire, her right to express herself. She wanted to be happy. And that is what we all want, men, women, you know, even whatever, everything that lives wants to be happy. And I don't understand why any patriarchal or sexist culture would deny women that fundamental human right. That's the right to be happy. So that's what Ukamaka is doing. What I love about Ogadimma is that this woman just wants to be happy, wants her world to recognize her. And for me, a feminist, that is the future of feminism. The future of feminism that, or the feminism that reminds men that women too are humans. And that connects to the work you are doing about the construction of masculinity. So what from your reading your manuscript, what you are challenging that the artificial or rather the construction of artificial humanity. And that also links to what Professor Chibo, Arthur Chibo said in his recent book about this toxic masculinity. I think he singled out Okonkwo as a toxic man. And unfortunately, most Igbo scholars have chosen Okonkwo as an ideal man. But, you know, for me, Okonkwo is well, this will sound controversial. It's not even human, you know. I don't know why Achebe gave us that character. Anyway, so he's already there. But we, and this is what I love about the works you guys are doing, that we are challenging that narrative. We are proving that men can cry, you know, that men can feel, and that women deserve to be free. They deserve to be happy. I think a happy woman is a gift to her husband. Her husband must make it possible. So this just you guys can comment on this, but I love the work you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Chiloeze. And without wanting to sound patronizing, I think for me, I've been inspired, and I've really done so much from your work, particularly in thinking about or reconceiving my own notions of masculinity. And I really appreciate what you are doing in terms of foregrounding how we have to realize that everybody wants happiness, that at the end of the day, we all want to live, we all want to thrive, we all want to desire the same thing, and which boils down to we just want to be happy and then move on with our life. And also we need to challenge all those things that make that happiness or attainment of happiness impossible. So thank you for those heartwarming compliments, particularly for me, living in Edmonton, where we were battling with -29. Now it's so cold and my voice is almost croaky from the cold. So this compliment really warms me up and puts a lot of heat into my own body. Now, thank you very much, Ukamaka. So just after you say something, we can listen to Ugochukwu ask his own question. So Ukamaka, over to you briefly.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. gives me so much joy, and also knowing that we are having this conversation. It's a huge plus. It's an important conversation we need to have, even in our immediate community. In Abag and in my hometown, we need to sit down and have this conversation. my dad, I've been having a lot of conversation with my dad. The dad I knew in the 80s, yeah, late 90s. It's not the dad I knew today. So much has changed, and it came from having conversation, came from talking about these things. And even the discussion, I don't want to bring family business onto here, but then the kind of decisions he has made recently, I'm like, my God, like so much has changed. And it came from having conversation like that, understanding that people can grow. And if people can grow and change, culture can grow, because culture is man-made. Even the idea of a woman sitting at home doing absolutely nothing came from Victorian notions of what family should be, and was sort of like brought to us by the CMS, like what the woman, the exemplary, virtuous woman, clothed in Victorian notion, should be doing at home, sort of rewired that. So you see, we kept having this shift in terms in our traditions, in the way we do things. And now it's changing, and we're having such conversation, having Professor Eze even talking about toxic masculinity. This is the first time I'm hearing somebody talking about Okonkwo, and that I have so much to say about Okonkwo. We can try character in this one about the Ekwefi. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Gochuku, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, thank you everyone. And it's lovely to see all of you. Probably this is the first time I'm meeting most of you, even though I've been following you silently. So, and thank you, Ukamaka, for your book, Okadima. I've not read it, but I have to read it because it speaks so much to me. And also Uche for the wonderful work you're doing. So my question is going to be more like a question and a comment, but it's something I've been thinking about. I've been reflecting for a while now on the issue of patriarchy, particularly in Igbo land. I personally see it, issues, the reproduction of patriarchy and misogyny, toxic masculinity, and all that. I see it as more like a product of fear. Just like racism, it's like a product of fear. The reason why it's constantly being reproduced is the fear that changing the status quo might, trying to upset the status quo might create some form of insecurity in the minds of men. And what I've been thinking is, how do we, especially as young writers, as scholars, how do we begin to create spaces where we can have some sort of transgenerational conversation, particularly among the younger people, making them to understand that there is nothing to be afraid of, to see yourself as normal to younger, because I believe that people were not born as misogynist. These were some sort of ideas or they imbibed from the society. And I believe that it can be reconstructed. So my question is, how do we, as writers and scholars, begin to create spaces through our various works for this kind of transgenerational conversations to be had, where young people will be free or see no fear or no need to feel insecure if they give up certain notions of masculinity they have. Thank you.
Yeah. Uche, you want to go first?
Well, take a bite out of that and then I'll contribute my own.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, for that question. It's quite a difficult task that is not going to be actualized in one day. It's more like a process. It would have been different if I were like a preacher, like Onang came now. I will stand in the pulpit and talk about this every Sunday, and people would listen, and change the idea. But then, thankfully, we have like social media, for example, that's contributing to this discourse on sort of how to disrupt the patriarchy from within the patriarchy itself, especially for men, for example. And social media has really changed, like I check in the trends of the minds of the people close to me, who are on Twitter, for example, on Facebook, for example, intermingling with all this conversation. And I've seen so much change compared to who they used to be like 5 years ago, for example. They are no longer that. They are more accepting, they're more open to having conversation. Yes, the insecurities, they're still there. The fear that the woman is going to sort of like upend or take away their power and make them feel powerless within the system. it's still there, but it's an ongoing conversation for me. And for me, the medium through which I'm able to do this is through my writing, through writing about things that are very familiar, things that my people within my immediate community can look, like they can relate to, and also being vulnerable, which is why I strongly believe in writing from the personal, like what they call confessional writing. Which I don't understand why they call it confessional writing. I still have a theoretical response to that. To that, there's something very, I don't know. There's a connotation on yeah. I don't want to go into all that, but then yeah, mixing the personal, writing, because when you put a face, when something is not just fully an invention, like it's not just fully fiction, when it's set in real world, you're looking at real life stakes, real life consequences to that, we begin to have conversation. When I wrote my postpartum post, I didn't, because what I usually do is, before I publish anything, I share with my family, when they would read it, they would say, yeah, this is beautiful, yeah. But then when I wrote that postpartum post, I didn't share with anyone, So my husband, for example, had to go online and read it. So when he read it, was like, we should have talked about this. Well, I couldn't talk about this because the idea that we should have this does not even exist in the first place. I felt safe enough to be able to pour it out. Just like what you mentioned, the anger behind it, but also showing why this conversation is important to have. So I think for me, what I do to be able to have this transnational conversation that you raised, Ugochukwu, is through my writing, most recently through my publication, Isele. Our recent issue is the woman issue, where we confront the notions of the woman, how we exist within that category, woman in our society. Welcoming excellent stories and poems by people, and even personal essays, experience. So when we share this out there and we're able to have as much readership as possible read them, it's adding to that conversation, and which we hope will continue to expand within our smaller, immediate, and local community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fantastic response, Okamaka. And Ugochukwu, I saw the chats the comment you just, question you put in the chat. Yeah, I think it's necessary to also find a way to fictionalize some of these issues in children's books, which is what I'm doing, and I think Ukamaka is also planning to do. And in my latest children's book titled Wishmaker, I also played with this idea of fear in terms of the other, the stranger, and how we easily associate fear with strangeness, and this whole idea that we must always be afraid of the stranger, of someone who we don't know. And I think that speaks also to the way patriarchy, to the way misogyny, sexism work, in terms of, oh, well, we just have to be afraid of women. And if you look at most of the stories existing prior and then currently, women are always cast in very reductive stereotypes that say, oh, you have to be afraid of women because women can bring about the downfall of a man. And so you see how fear and the woman figure is cast as a stranger, even though she's a woman. And so thank you for that suggestion. And I think, like, to add to what Ukamaka just said, having this kind of conversation, raising consciousness, building awareness, and then people creating safe spaces for people to talk, to unburden themselves, to even express their confusion or their frustration or even their outrage about what is happening, is a good way to bring awareness, because at the end of the day, we are also reflective and contemplative individuals. We think about our real life consequences. We sometimes feel guilty, we sometimes feel bad. And I think these are good feelings and good ways for us to really think about how we're implicated in some of these structures, whether overtly or covertly. So I think this is one of the ways the Igbo Studies Association has made available for us to really come together and then share ideas and forge paths and ways to really think about the little roles we can play at the micro level or at the personal level or at the interpersonal level. So I just want to encourage every one of us to not lose hope that things are not changing. Like Ukamaka said, things are changing. And for me also, I had a very fixed notion of what it means to be a man so many years ago. But I think I'm also building that awareness and looking inward and asking myself, how can I be a better man, a better human, a better parent, sibling, in-law, and so these are ways we can also self-reflexively come to an awareness and challenge these structures and make life possible and easy for everyone. As Dr. Chiloeze said, we all want happiness. We all want some sort of contentment. And so I think we have 13 minutes left, so we can still take one or two questions before we come to a close. So 12 minutes left to wrap up. So please, if you have one or two questions, you can just ask them right away. And
yeah, I think Dr. Ayandova has a question.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Dr. Ayandova, please go ahead.
I was beginning to think you weren't going to call me.
So long as you don't talk about Okonkwo.
And thanks for this. My morning has been everywhere. But I just wanted to use the opportunity to say that I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and to let Ukamaka know that I'm a fan from a distance. Yeah, I don't think I have a question actually, but it would have been a comment. But because I haven't read the book, I think it's safe to put it across as a question, and that is related again to what many folks have talked about today, the idea of gender and feminism and so on. So it looks to me, when we, for example, say the story of colonization, the kinds of stories that we tell in order to decolonize. So usually such stories, you have a sense of an idea of freedom, and what that kind of freedom would be usually is the freedom to be independent from the colonizers, the freedom to reclaim our land, the freedom to be autonomous culturally, politically, and so on. When I hear stories about women's condition, on patriarchy and gendered forms of oppression, I'm thinking, so what is the story here? What is the liberation? What is that world where a woman is free and equal with a man? And how is that world made up? What are the components of this world, and so on? So the feminist stories coming from my generation of writers, I'm looking for that. And I know I engaged Adichie on this, and she didn't like the question. I didn't ask the question right, but she was really annoyed with me for asking the question in the light of purple hibiscus. But that's the kind of thing I think I'm looking for. And the reason I ask this question is, again, I'm coming from a tradition of storytelling, where storytelling is like cultivation, planting, akoko, eko akoko. So we are more or less planting stories because we expect that stories will germinate and grow into something that could influence our lives in different ways, but something edible, something we can do something with. So I'm looking for, in your own world of storytelling, whether you've figured out this world where the woman is free and how that world is designed, and it's perhaps not the agonistic kinds of freedom where it's resilience, and the man has to be defeated in a way in order for the woman to be free. So I'm looking for that liberationist ethos or underpinnings of this feminist narrative and how that narrative helps us, at least to a large extent, to move beyond chronicling these experiences of oppression and the woman's condition. So do you have that word? Is it something you figured out? Because otherwise it makes me a pessimist that, well, it's not going to change.
That's such a very complex and very difficult question that you've just asked. I think I do not have a direct response to that. What I do, I am most interested in. It's not about creating the world where the woman becomes this utopia where everyone is living and having kumbaya and all of that. You know, we will continue to have this an ongoing thing. This struggle is an ongoing thing. What I am most interested in, which was supposed to be like a question to Uche, what I'm most interested in, especially particular to my own personal experience as a woman and also as a mother, and also how society, the notions they had for me as a mother, that sort of compounded my problem before I had to put not just physical, but also psychological distance between me and those conditions. What I am super interested at the moment, my research interest is on the fringe conversations about womanhood. That thing that, you know, when we say a person is a woman, within our own community, immediate Igbo land, we already have ideas of what a woman is, which is an entirely different conversation. But what I am most interested in is what I call the postpartum interiorities, stories about childbirth, pregnancy, motherhood, because that is where it all starts. That is what shapes, if I hadn't given birth to children, if I didn't have my postpartum complication, I wouldn't be here in the Midwest pursuing a PhD. I'll be somewhere in Aba, you know, being a good housewife, enjoying, let the man go and work and bring the money home. Paso, watch TV, enjoy my life, live as I want. But then something happened with bringing children to the world, and that changed the entire course of my entire life, and I'm here. So what I found fascinating, having studied and read so much about taking courses on gender studies, is that such postpartum narratives or postpartum interiorities are not centralized in our academic or literary discourse. They're often left on the fringe. You know, when we talk about the role of the woman in the society, how to disrupt the patriarchy, for example, we don't centralize these topics that are very personal to me. And I feel they are so important because they stay muted and silenced in our community. There's so much anger, there's so much pain because we can't talk about that. You know, starting from the church that expects you to give birth like the woman of Hebrew. You know, you have women having bodily disfiguration, but they can't talk about that because you are not strong. You know, you're not, that idea of what it means to be a woman. Recently, I started asking women questions, even writers, sending them emails for them to send me their responses. And you will not believe the responses I got from women. You will not believe that this postpartum narrative. So I am not interested in creating a different, I'm interested in asking, in sort of like puncturing a hole. Why are we not talking about this now? Let's bring this to the center. That is my research focus. Because when we begin to talk about that, you will understand where the trajectory of a family, where it changes, where it begins to change, because we don't talk about that, you know, like a woman having vaginal prolapse, for example, but no one talks about it. In fact, if I ask people here, 10 people there, or ask everyone, what vaginal prolapse, you'll be surprised that nobody knows what vaginal prolapse is, because we don't talk about that, but many people have that. Do you understand? So that's the word I am creating, dragging that conversation from the fringe and plopping it in the middle. Let's bloody talk about this. You know, it's important. It changed. I am an example. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. You know, I would have been somewhere else. So all of this didn't change. And as I'm here, it affected my children. You know, I'm not with my children here. You know, it affected the course of my family. It changed so many things, you know. But then we don't pay attention to that. You know, we hear a woman becomes bitter. Oh, you've not asked a question. When you ask a question, you'll be shocked, you know. So that is what I am bringing. That is the word I am creating by dragging that question from the shorelines and plopping it in the middle and telling everybody, let's talk about this really uncomfortable, nasty and grimy subject that changes an entire woman's, not just her narrative arc, but the family and then the community. That's what I am doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Ayaduba, are you okay with those responses?
Was I not supposed to be okay with them? No,
yeah.
I mean, these were fantastic. Of course, it's clear to me a world that is open to hearing these kinds of uncomfortable truths, and how conversations could open the doors for rethinking reality, rethinking the kinds of experiences that people are subjected to. That's again, it aligns, I think, with the kinds of politics that I do and all that. I'm also a little from the pessimistic side, again, because I understand that the key to the future has long been taken by the oppressors. And sometimes conversations or holding, what Olarotimi would describe as holding talks, becomes the end in itself. We know so much about the woman's condition. Many of us grew up, I was raised by a single mom. It was the nasty experience, right? So we know a lot of these things. And we can describe them in different ways from our little worlds. But then how conversations can change the world is what I don't exactly fully know. That makes me a bit pessimistic, but I don't think I have an alternative that does it better. So perhaps we keep talking about these things and refusing to keep quiet until something changes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Engineer Sandra Okigwe, could you go ahead and ask your question? And once you ask your question, and then I'll just wrap up.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Sandra. Sorry, for some reason I can't turn on my video, but I must appreciate each and every one of you, Uche and Okamaka. Very wonderful job you're doing. I really, really appreciate it. Very nice conversation to have. I have like a similar experience, I can quickly share, very short. When I was gonna have my last child, that's in Canada, I'm not in Nigeria. And my friend's mom came from Nigeria, and she was like, don't take epidural, it's not for strong women. A woman is not supposed to take that. A woman is supposed to just have her child. I said, okay. I went in. After the pain set in, it was too much for me to bear. I told them, please give me the epidural. I don't care, I just want to have this child. And then they say it's too late to have it. So anyway, that's part of how we are raised and all that. So, but we still need to be careful about how we push this narrative, how we move people to say, no, you can't do this, so that we don't upturn our society. My question is, how do you strike a balance? I understand what you're doing from both sides, but there's be a middle ground. Your assumption is that every woman is unhappy. Yeah, every woman is not unhappy because of the society. So we should put that into consideration. There are people in the middle. And a virtuous woman is not someone that doesn't go to work. Even the biblical description of a virtuous woman did not say she wasn't working. And another thing we should think about that is being at home doesn't mean you are not working. You might be at home, you might have a reason for being at home. You might want to raise your children yourself and say, okay, I'm just going to be home to raise my children. That's what I want to do. At some point in my life, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to get into a career and all that. So there are so many scenarios you can look at it in so many different ways. But we just need to be very careful when we talk about these things, as if, okay, our women are all dying because of this and so we need to strike a balance. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Engineer Kibe. I don't think anyone has mentioned that every woman is suffering. I think the attention we're paying is how complex we are, and even showing even not just the complex, also even the class complex, the difference, like the experience of a lower class, low income earning family is different from a woman who is from a rich family, and also housewife is a job. I mean, I was a housewife for a while before I had to go learn a trade and get a job. But housewife is the most difficult job. So, and also, I mean, it's so beautifully complex the way our notions of family in southeastern Nigeria. you get to do all that work and then you're not paid for it. But then for some people, they're also placed on salary. I mean, my cousin was placed on salary by the husband for house, and she earned more than me that was working in the bank. I was toiling away, you know, enduring sexual assault at the banking industry, and she was earning much more than me. So I think that's what we are paying attention, what we are calling attention to, those textures to show how different things it's, and I also did mention it earlier here. I push back against generalization. It's impossible. I mean, anyone would be a liar to say that women are suffering in Nigeria. No, that's not true. What we are calling attention to is the complexity, how a different person's experience sort of translates on its opposite to another person's experience. That's what we are doing. And also the idea of virtuousness is so textured, is so different, you know, from the traditional notion, it's so different from the person who goes to church, what it means to be virtuous, for example. But virtuosity virtuousness in my own immediate community is so heavily contributed, also defined along Christian lines and Christian notion of what it should be. That's what we are doing, and that's what I believe I'm doing with my work, to show our complexity, and also to never ever tell a single story about the people. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll just add quickly to that. I think, like Ukamaka just said, one of the things as scholars and critical thinkers we do is not to buy into generalization or even cliches or stereotypes, and because we always look for the nuance, and the nuance would be what Engineer Okigwe is describing as the middle ground. And then the middle ground itself could also be shifting, because the middle ground is not really stable to me. And the middle ground is also a place that we could still stay and interrogate certain things that we take for a fact. And we also have to appreciate the fact that people's experience, even when you are a middle-class person, your experience is not the same. There's no homogeneity of experiences for every person. A woman who is a doctor, who is single, her experience is different from a woman who is a doctor and she's a family person, or even a woman who is a doctor who doesn't believe in community. So, but these are different shades. So what we are saying is that we should always look out for these shades. We should also look out for this fringe or marginal stories that don't come to the fore. And for me, it would be silly to use my own experience as a man as a Nigerian man in Canada to explain other people's realities. And as we all know, even though there are people living in diaspora, some people came as refugees, some people came as economic class, some people came as students, but everybody who is an immigrant, it doesn't mean that we all share the same instances of microaggression or instances of negative diasporic experiences. So we're all situated differently in terms of class, gender, ethnicity, economic also. And so that's, I think that's what Ukamaka and I believe most writers, they do. They don't completely buy into generalization. They take a step back and then say, oh, what's the complexity here? What's the nuance here? What is the middle ground here? What is the other space I can really think about this thing without saying, oh, men are like this, women like this, virtue is like this, virtue is like that. So, because at the end of the day, none of us is infallible. We're all complex. We all have our little weaknesses. We all have our strengths. And so these are part of the thing we should discuss, and we should try to break that veil of silence. And then rather than lurking in the shadows, we should also be able to say, oh, we can do better. We can go this way and then find the right solution. So in as much as we would love to continue this conversation and listening to other amazing questions, we just have to beg your indulgence that we've exceeded our time by a few minutes. And I would like to ask Dr. Chilo Eze if he has any comments to make, or if he would rather we just, Ukamaka and I, share a very short remark, and then wrap it up?
No, just conclude with your own remarks, please. Thank you.
Okay, Ukamaka, you go first, and then I'll close the event.
Yeah, I just have thanks. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation and for your brilliant questions. And also, I love how the questions are so different. Chibo and Yadoba challenge us with sort of drag something entirely different into the conversation. And then Engineer Sandra Ukaiwe came with a question. Yado Gojoko Koye's question, like different textures, Hopeze, and even Professor himself. I am grateful, I am thankful, and I'm happy that we have, like this is a community that I have been longing for since I came here, moved to the Middle West. Yeah, I wish I can just drag you out of the stream and plop you in my little apartment. Apartment is very tiny, and so we'll continue to talk like this. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
So thank you, everyone. First off, I want to thank the Igbo Studies Association for creating this space and making it possible for us to have these important conversations. And I really appreciate the diversity of questions, responses, and all the conversations we've had, Ukamaka and I. And I also thank the executive management team of the Igbo Studies Association for their support for this, the dialogue. And this is the first of its kind. And I hope we'll have, I'm looking forward to the next edition. And I think one of the things we are planning to do is to also extend this kind of platform to up and coming poets, writers, and emerging and established academics. So look out for any other notice of the event. And if you haven't yet got to Kamaka's book, please do so. And I'll also use the opportunity to promote my own book. So my book is out. So you can get a copy of that. And thank you all for your support. We really appreciate you being here, making out on a Saturday morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are, to be with us, and then to prompt us to really think about what it means to be an Igbo man or woman and a Nigerian also in this time and space, and have a wonderful holiday next week, Christmas holiday, and be safe, stay warm, and be hopeful. And thank you very much. So we look forward to seeing you some other time, or once the second edition is put together. So thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, thank you.